No, we've got a big one. Speaking of hauling in a big fish, he's got sockeye waiting as we finish this up. This is the PP1 podcast, brought to you in part with Move Health and Wellness, the Dean Blundell Network. We've got the legendary Jim Hughson. I mean, I can give you a nice long intro, but I think anybody that is tuning in has a pretty decent idea of who we're chatting with right now. He is out in the beautiful Okanagan. Jim, I mean, without any other words, welcome to the show.
Ryan, Ted, it is my pleasure to join you. It's cool to sit outside and chat a little hockey.
Absolutely.
Where are we going?
Absolutely. So there is, just to warn everybody, we're recording on yet another night in the Okanagan where we've got a little bit of a storm going on. So if you happen to hear a thunder roll through, that is nobody's fault but nature. So that's what happens when you live in paradise. Sometimes we got to change the pace a little bit. Dean, my goodness, I'm thinking of who was the intro. Jim, let's get right into it. So you're recently retired from 42 years of broadcasting NHL games. Sounds like a decent career. Did you keep up to hockey when you called it a career, or did you kind of take some space and just enjoy the peace for a little bit?
I've never not followed hockey, and I still love it. I still get up in the morning and I read notes from around the league because I'm still interested. I'm just not interested in getting on a plane and living in a hotel to be there. That's largely what happened to me. But I still love the game. I love the game at a lot of different levels. I spent a lot of time as a board chairman at the BC Hockey Hall of Fame, where we try to celebrate some of the past. And yeah, it's all good. Everything is I love the game, and I left on my own terms, and it's fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed watching the playoffs, although going into July is a bit weird, but I understand what's gone on the last few years. Um, and I so appreciate the level that the game is played at now. I just didn't want to be there anymore. Just didn't want to spend too many years living in hotels and on airplanes, and it was time to say see you later and let somebody else do it. So it's all good. I have a love affair with the game because it's given me and my family everything that we have, and I think I'll always be the biggest fan. And then now I can just sit on my couch and criticize all the guys that used to criticize me.
It's a pretty easy job on this side, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, it's really. But if you love the game, it's a wonderful game to watch, and the game is in such a good place. And so yeah, I love that. I love watching the Stanley Cup final. I love watching the energy that comes from guys who've never been in the playoffs before. Love it. It's just it's a great game. It was just time for me to step away from it. So it's all good. There's nothing there's nothing negative about it. It's all very positive for me.
Perfect. Love it. I also love that now you've decided to retire in the Okanagan. I don't know if you've lived here, like I know you've lived obviously all around the country while you were working, but if there's like sort of a special place as to why the Okanagan was the place. And now that you're here and you've had a year of retirement under your belt, my guess is that you've had some time on the links. Has the golf game improved, or are you spending a little more time out there doing stuff? Are you spending more time just out there having fun?
What I find is with golf for me is that I love it, but the more I play, the worse I get. I don't get that.
It's supposed to go the other way.
Yeah, I know. I don't get that, but I do love it, and so I spend some time. You know what I love is I play at the Fairview Mountain Golf Club in Oliver, in the Okanagan, and it is the least pretentious golf course in the world, with a great membership of wonderful people who don't. Nobody cares what you shoot. They just want to, they just want to be out there together and have some fun. And so yeah, within reason. If you're hacking away and you're in the woods all day, they might
Yeah.
leave you behind. But
Yeah, to tap on the shoulder.
no, it's a great spot. So it's not a yeah, for me, it's not one of those things where I retired so I could golf, because if I retired so I could golf, I'd be back working again,
Yeah, it's not
because
cheap.
I'm not that good at it. However, that's just one of the things. I love the Okanagan. I grew up in British Columbia. I was exiled to the east for a long period of time, and I enjoyed it immensely. But this is the province that I grew up in, that I love. There's just so much going on, whether it's the Okanagan or the north or the island or the coast. It's just a beautiful place to live, and so that's why we're centered here.
Speaking of BC, and you grew up from Fort St. John there, we have a question from one of our followers, Brendan. I want to get his last name right, Kabliak. See, you've done all the names for all the video games, so you probably would have hit that way better
Kubliak,
than
yeah.
me. Yeah. The Flyers and the Dawson Creek Canucks. What memories do you have of the Northern rivalry? Because I'm sure it was crazy.
Oh my God, where do you start?
Yeah, we might need a little context for this too. Yeah.
So I grew up I was born in Dawson Creek. I moved to Fort St. John as a toddler. There's the first big thunder. Um, I moved to Fort St. John because in those days, it was the late 50s, and they pushed a railway across the Peace River from the South Peace to the North Peace to Fort St. John. And my father was a grain buyer, um, and so he moved into Fort St. John and ran an elevator. So that's where we lived, and that's where I grew up. Those were the halcyon days of senior leagues. Like, if you think about what was going on then, there were 6 teams in the NHL. There were 6 teams in the American Hockey League. That's not a lot of room for an awful lot of players. So what happened was, the all across the country, the guys that couldn't quite make the NHL or couldn't quite make the AHL team needed a place to play, and they were great players. And so all of these senior leagues formed. And in British Columbia, uh, and I know it better than in a lot of the other provinces, but it happened everywhere. So in British Columbia, you had the Okanagan Mainline League, you had the Kootenay International League, you had the Caribou League, the South Peace Hockey League. All of these leagues sprang up, and what they did was they would invite players who were fringe players from the NHL and the AHL to come to their town, and they'd get them a job, and they'd get them a job at the co-op store or the SO bulk plant, or any number of businesses who took part in that. But their main reason for being there was to play hockey. And in Fort St. John, it was the Fort St. John Flyers. And quite honestly, when I grew up playing road hockey, I didn't want to be Johnny Bauer. I didn't want to be Dave Keon. I wanted to be Jimmy Anderson. Jimmy Anderson was the best right winger that ever played senior hockey, and he's the best hockey player I've ever seen in my life, because against a memory, you don't have a chance, right? He was fantastic. And my parents had season tickets on the blue line at the North Peace Arena. No, there was chicken wire on the end, but no glass. But so we were right on the blue line. And if somebody got body checked right in front of you, the sweat hit you and they came over the boards. But it was fantastic. These guys were so much larger than life for me as a young person. And you know what? The whole community was there. Like, the building probably, there it goes again. The building in Fort St. John probably held 1,500 people, but on a big game when the Dawson Creek Canucks were in town, we used to joke that they'd buy the fire marshal a ticket to go on a vacation, because people were hanging from the rafters. It was such a big deal. It was, and there was a guy named Gene Forrester who was a barber in town, and he ran a brass band. And up in the corner of the arena, they played all these marching tunes constantly, and it was just it was an incredible atmosphere where everybody in town was there, and it was the cold of winter. And my job was, as like a 10 or 11-year-old kid, even, was to go out during the intermission and start the car, so it wouldn't freeze up because it was 35 below outside, and go out and start the car and let it run for a while, and then come back in for the start of the second period. And one of the things that I would do all the time is when I was in the car, I'd turn the radio on and I'd listen to the Hot Stove League, and I'd listen to the local guys. Bob Harrison was the who worked in Kelowna and ran he invented the Okanagan Sun, basically. Bob was the morning man, and there was Bill Dyer, who was the local newspaper guy who covered the Canucks, and the other guys that they would bring in, and they would just sit and bullshit about what happened in the game so far. And I would listen to it intently, and sometimes agree with them and sometimes not. And I wonder sometimes in the back of my mind whether that's where that was the first impetus for me to be part of the media. Bit of a stretch, but it was a cool time. And but those games left an indelible impression on me. When I was old enough and a little older and strong enough, one of my jobs was to scrape the ice in the intermissions, because we didn't have Zambonis then. So you had a whole bunch of kids go out and scrape the ice, and then the guys came out with the 45-gallon drums and dragged them along to flood the ice. But my memory of those days, it's why we have Hall of Fames, because that's the stuff you want to remember, right? It's just it's the fabric of your youth. It's the fabric of the community that I grew up in. And so the South Peace Hockey League and the players who were in it it's just an incredibly important part of my life, because I still remember those games to this day. And when I actually got to broadcast one of those games, it was incredibly cool, because I knew all the guys. I didn't have to do any homework. I knew every player in the South Peace Hockey League, and I knew them. I knew them extremely well. So yeah. So your question about the South Peace Hockey League and what was going on in hockey in the senior leagues in Fort St. John, it's pretty cool. It's a big part of my life.
This is crazy to me. Obviously, sometimes you obviously want to hear from a guest about a story from in the past, but like it sounds like it left just a huge impact on you, and maybe this was your stepping stone into who really ever knows. I find it quite crazy that you go from being a Canucks fan in that era with a different kind of Canucks all the way to one day calling games for the Vancouver Canucks. I mean, how on earth did you get there? Like, I mean, obviously it was a long and winding road, and there must have been some things that happened. I heard a rumor that you had planned on being an actor. I mean, thank goodness that didn't happen for the rest of us. But I mean, at some point you end up calling games for the Vancouver Canucks, and I just wonder how it even gets to that point with obviously some hard work taking place, and then obviously some things need to go right for you too.
Yeah, without question, a few things, Ted, have to fall into place. But I was going to be an actor. I went off to the University of Victoria, and I was in the theater department, and I had a great interest in that. Didn't take long before I found out that university didn't pay very well, and that there were a lot of other people that were really interested in being actors too. And I had a job offer to go back to a radio station. So much to the chagrin of my parents, I went back to work at a radio station. And I remember when my parents lived in Parksville on Vancouver Island. And when I left the University of Victoria and told them that I was quitting university to go back to this radio job, I arrived to try and explain to them what I was up to. And my mother had taken my graduation picture and turned it backwards so it wasn't facing out. It was facing. That's all she said.
Oh, no.
She didn't say a word. That's all she had to do. She told me how she felt about that. But that's what I wanted to do. So, and then a whole bunch of things fell into place. Like I didn't care. I wasn't motivated to be a hockey play-by-play man. I'm not wired that way. At the time, I was motivated to have a job. I liked the business of the radio business, and I would have done anything. And I did a lot of other things in it. But I happen to be better than the other people that were in the station at calling play-by-play and that sort of thing. So I got that job. But really, when I lived that nomadic existence that many people do, all I was trying to do was make $50 more a month. That was it. That was my motivation. I'd moved from one town to the next because $650 was $50 more than six,
Yeah,
and and that
exactly.
and so there was, it wasn't like I had this incredible career course that I was following. No, I was following my nose. I was following the dollars and having a blast meeting people and but hockey was the ticket for me to move around. So I got from Penticton to Kelowna to Brandon, Manitoba, and back to Vancouver. I got to move around a lot and got to see a lot of hockey, and that turned out to be the path that was the best one for me. Like I might have, who knows? I might have been anchoring the national, except that I was better at hockey,
I mean, it checks
and
out.
that's what, yeah, it worked out okay.
No kidding.
So at what point do you realize that calling games is what I want to do? I mean, did you fall into that by accident? Did you press towards that as a course, or did you just know something you had a knack for?
No, when I knew I could do it, and I felt it was pretty cool. I got offered a job to move to CKNW radio station in Vancouver,
Oh, nice.
and Jim Robson. I knew Jim Robson really well because I listened to him. And one of the jobs that I had in the small radio station in Fort St. John was during the evening when the Canuck games were on and the BC Lions football games were on, I would be the guy who ran the board, they called it, and plug in the commercials, the local commercials, while the game was on. So I listened intently to every game. So I got to listen to Jim Cox do the Lions games and Jim Robson do the Canuck games, and so I wouldn't say I was smitten, but I was impressed, and I knew what was going on there. So when I was offered a job to move to Vancouver, I wasn't offered any hockey play-by-play, but I was offered a job to go to CKNW, which was the biggest radio station in British Columbia. Was you know Al Davidson is the guy who phoned me and offered me the job, and Tiger Al was renowned. Everybody who's ever been in the business knows who Tiger Al is. And he phoned me one day, and I was working in Brandon, Manitoba, and he said, "You wanna come out to BC, work at NW?" And I said, "Sure. When do you want me to start?" And he said, "September." I said, "I'll be there." And then I hung up, and I spent the summer driving my Westphalia van back into British Columbia, and realized when I got there in late August that I'd never asked him how much he was going to pay, and it didn't matter. Didn't matter. I was going to work at CKNW, and I was in a business that I loved, and turned out it was okay. It was better than what I was making in Brandon, but but then the next thing that was going on is that Jim Robson he was starting to do a lot of Hockey Night in Canada games. So at CKNW, they needed somebody to broadcast the Canuck games on Saturday nights when Robson was off doing television. And I somehow talked my way into getting that opportunity. And when in December of 1979, I was able to broadcast my first game at the Montreal Forum, while Jim was off doing another game, I was smitten by the industry and walked away from that night thinking, this could be a pretty cool life. You want to work at this because, once you get your fingers into this, it's pretty cool. And so I just worked at it and wanted to make it a full-time job. And it took me a couple of years, but I got it. And it worked out pretty well.
It's funny how that works,
I love
eh?
that.
It's funny how that works out. I mean, Jim, obviously a man of the people, the Westphalia. That's great. So a lot of people can now relate. Like, I could do this. I could do this. I want to get into one of the ones that I think everybody wanted to hear about. We found out today. You've called a lot of Hockey Night in Canada games. You've called a lot of Canucks games. There are a couple calls that are basically in Canucks lore. Great save, Luongo, and I'll never be able to say it like you. Great save, Kluche. Do you get a lot of people? I mean, now you're kind of tucked away, but did you get a lot of people that, stop you in the street and kind of ask you to bring up those calls, kind of like we're doing now? And Wyatt Arndt also asked, who was your favorite goalie of the two, or maybe there was a different one to make that kind of call on? Because I think your theater background, definitely the theatrics definitely came out in those two calls that, again, anybody that has watched or listened to a Canucks game in the last 20 plus years, I mean, your voice is on two pretty iconic ones, and they happened a lot.
Yeah, and you know what? None of that was ever intentional. It just sort of happens. I've never, quite frankly, I've never really liked signature calls. They kind of become cringeworthy. But there was it was 2007 actually when the whole great save Luongo happened, because they weren't a great team yet. They were coming off of they changed over from the 2004 team. They'd gone through the whole Bertuzzi business. They had shifted so that the Sedin's deal for Roberto to come in and play. And in that 2007 year, I felt like they were so dependent on him. He had such a great season. And my goodness, it just seemed like every time that they got in trouble, there was a great save Luongo.
Yeah.
And that's just the way they were. And then a playoff year when they played the series against Dallas, and he was just so good. So it kind of happened generically. It was never intentional. But yeah, I mean, I've heard that screamed at me across parking lots.
I mean, you did it to yourself, Jim. Those are,
Yeah,
again, not something that you want to be famous for, but those are calls that we cherish, I think.
But it's all cool. If people are sitting at home and listening to that, and that's exciting for them, it was exciting for me because the team was pretty good, and I've always sort of had an emotional involvement with the game, not necessarily for one team or the other, but I love the game when it's played well, and love to. I learned from the master of this, Danny Gallivan, who never had a bad game. Like, there was never a bad game that Danny broadcast, because you can always find a redeeming quality somewhere, and you can't, as a broadcaster and as a TV person, don't go down with the ship just because the team's having an awful night. Find something, dig in, and have some fun with it. And that was my life in broadcasting. Is like, if I'm going to be here, I'm not going to be miserable just because the game's no good. Let me find something else. Now, there are occasions when you have to throw out, you have to just say, I'm sorry, but this game is like watching two guys fish. Yeah. And there were nights where that the audience out there is watching, and they know that it's a bad game, and that it's a bad game, so don't try and disguise it. But for the most part, I always tried to find some redeeming qualities somewhere. And quite often in those days, in the early days of Roberto Luongo's days in Vancouver, it was his play. So that kind of stuck with him, and it stuck with me, and that's cool. I'm just fine with that. But I know I had a blast with it.
I love. Obviously, we all love the great save Luongo. So I always like the more subtle stuff, like the classic "You take it, I got it." Big fan of that. But we, which is awesome. But we always, we always think about, some of these greats that you've named. Obviously, Cox and Jim Robson, and you've kind of stated openly that you still follow the game, you still watch, and I'm assuming you still watch baseball and all those guys. Is there anybody that you're watching games being called now that you can just say like, wow, I'm just a really big fan of this guy. I'm a really big fan of the way he calls the game, the way he tells the story, the way he's sort of illustrating things. Is there anybody that you're just really high on right now?
There's a number of guys. I mean, I don't want to. Yeah, I just, you know what? There's some people that I really respect that have done their work in the business that when I know when John Forsland calls a game, I know he's done his homework. I know he knows who's in the game. But you know what? It's a really interesting time in the sports industry. Like, it used to be that people, like, I always felt that every game that I broadcast, I had to make sure there were two teams in the game. There were two teams in every game. That pissed a lot of people off because, you know, if it was Vancouver playing Boston and Boston was having a really good game, well, you know what Vancouver fans thought of that. Same with the Maple Leafs and that sort of thing. But for me, it was always two teams in the game because that's the way I enjoy the sport. I've never been an unabashed fan of a particular team. So, so in answer to your question, like what goes on there is you kind of live with it and you enjoy the game. And so what I found though is in recent years, some of the people in different cities, because of their ownership, because of who they work for, they're forced to be fans of the team. And I quite frankly can't stand watching the broadcast because it's, you know, when their team scores, it's like they won the Stanley Cup. But when the other team scores, it's like an offside. You know, I don't get that. Appreciate the game, love the game, be unbiased, and you know, when somebody on the other team makes a fantastic play, acknowledge it, have some fun with it. But that's kind of where I see a huge difference for me in what the broadcast industry has done. So, yeah, that's a long-winded answer to your question about how I feel about broadcasters, but there are some really good national broadcasters who I love to listen to. John Forsland's one of them. Brendan Burke's another guy in the United States who's an up-and-comer who's going to be great. And there are a number of other people, some of them who work for teams in particular, who I trust and love and enjoy their broadcasts.
For the record, we're a big fan of long-winded answers here. So
that's what it's better than a yes or a no. So now you kind of brought up that you want to make sure there are two teams involved. And I think as British Columbians, we have been, and I'll say Canucks fans, we've been pretty spoiled with the Jim Hughsons. We've been the Jim Robsons. We've had Shorty. We've had Brendan Batchelor. We've had Joey Kenward, just to name a few. And I find listening to all of your broadcasts that there are two teams playing, for whether it's the local channel or it's the national. And now with the Canucks basically going in-house, and I'm sure they're going to be bringing one of the names that we already know, I find that we are still getting that two-sided game, because I've definitely listened or watched American channels or even some of the stuff out east, and it definitely does feel a little bit biased. Whereas, again, maybe we are a little bit biased as well out west here, but even watching some of the Flames broadcasts, and we've had Rick Ball, I mean, again, a Kelowna guy, or at least a Kelowna broadcaster, not necessarily a Kelowna guy, but we've kind of had both sides of the story through all of you, and I think that we've been blessed to have that, because I've definitely heard and listened to ones where you're right, it is one-sided and it isn't exciting, because you do want to know that there's a game going on, not one team running up the score or finding out that it's so-and-so is on a 6-game winning streak and this, that, and the other. Well, the other guy has the Art Ross Trophy winner on their team, but feel free to give him a little bit of love too. So I think we're all realistic out in BC, knowing that no, the Canucks haven't been always the best team, and we have to be aware that guys like a Connor McDavid or Wayne Gretzky or even Brad Marchand or Jerome McGinley, there are some pretty good players on the other side of the ledger too that we have to respect, and I think you guys have all done a great job of that. Do you think that's going to continue now that the Canucks are going in-house, though? Do you see maybe a little bit of a push towards the Canucks?
I'm not sure how it'll work. I hope that in Canada, that we stick with it. But I already see it fading, and I see it all over America. Like, so many of the people who call the games are employees of the team, and I get where they're at. They're trying to make a living, right? So that's fine. And some of them are are really good friends of mine, and I love the way they call the game and in the ridiculous fashion that some of them do. In that, like, they're so over the top for their home team and hate the other team. I just can't do it that way, and I never could do it that way. So I'm glad I don't have to even think about that anymore. But I just think that realistically, I hope that hockey fans feel the same way. That, like, yeah, you want to watch a really good game, but there's two teams, and yes, you may love your team and love them to death, but you have to, if you like the game, if the game is your thing. And here's the difference. Here's one of the differences in a lot of cities as the game has become more popular, and it has around North America. There are people who know nothing about hockey but everything about their home team. That's a big difference. And then even in Vancouver, there's a whole bunch of people who know nothing about hockey but love the Canucks. And so, as Mark Messier used to say about the Rangers, and I always love this line, he said, if you're going to say anything bad about the Rangers, you better love the Rangers. And so that's kind of the way it's going. And it's okay. It's that way in football. It's that way in baseball. It's fandom. So how can you argue that? I don't, and I don't even try and worry about it. I just found that I had to do it in a different fashion. I was always so concerned about, especially doing a national game, when you know that people from coast to coast are watching, and you know Vancouver's playing the New York Islanders, but you know that half the Islander team are from Canada too, and that their family in Prince Edward Island or in New Brunswick or in Ontario, they're watching the game and they're big fans, and their player is just as important as the center in the Vancouver Canucks. I always had to keep that in the back of my mind. Two teams, understanding, and I always thought about somebody's parents sitting in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, watching their kid play hockey, and how mad I would have been if the guy who was calling the game was just so one-sided that I couldn't even stand it anymore. So I never let it happen, or tried not to.
That's smart. Good to, or up in Fort St. John or Dawson Creek, right?
Yeah, we all felt this way before, that he was a man of the people. So now it's even more confirmed. So you're one of those rare guys that spent a ton of time working on the west coast of Canada. Spent time covering the Vancouver Canucks, and then you make the trip all the way to the other side of the country. And there's always been this sort of stigma that, like, Toronto doesn't know what's going on out west. They don't know what the province has in the Vancouver Canucks, or what they are for a team in the National Hockey League. Is that just something that Vancouver fans or Western Province fans have just made up, or is that something where maybe there wasn't as much attention being paid to the Canucks out east as they normally would have thought from a Western thought?
Ted, it's all about time difference. It's time immemorial. So there's two things I would say about that. One thing is that I don't think they care. I really don't think they do.
That's honest.
Because they're fans of the Montreal Canadiens, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Boston Bruins. That's where Eastern Canada. Those people are really fans of the game, and they're fans of their own team. Mm-hmm. But the Canuck games start at 10 o'clock at night.
Yep.
How many people are watching those? How many people in Toronto and Montreal and in Eastern Canada are watching? You know, if you're up in Newfoundland and you're watching the Canucks, then you must have a friend or a relative on the team.
Good check.
Otherwise,
Yep.
yeah, otherwise you're not paying attention to that. So I would say that's a big part of it. I don't think, you know, we've always, in the West Coast, we've always been caught up in this whole hate Toronto sort of thing. But when you really think about it, like think about your friends, go search your memory bank about where your friends and your neighbors are all from. They're probably all from the East anyway, because we're a pretty young part of the world. And it's just people moved from the East, they came to the West, they became very possessive about, yeah, I love the West, and now I'm a Westerner, now I'm British Columbian, until the Leafs came to town, and then they go to the closet and pull out their Ron Ellis sweater and go down to the game. Because that's where their allegiance was, and that's where their allegiance is, and that's where they grew up. You know, that's how they grew up. So I don't think they're really any different. I think the time difference makes a huge difference in such a big country that we have. That it's just like a lot of. I know from having worked in the East for years and years and years that it's really hard to stay up and watch the doubleheader, because the first game's over and it's bedtime, and especially on a weeknight. So some of it is just is a lot of the time difference, but then it's the rest of it is just healthy competitiveness that, like, people in the West, I think you grow up to hate Toronto.
No way.
You're taught that.
No.
Haven't
done that at all to my kids.
But the problem is that when you hate that, and then they in the East, they just brush you off and say, hey, there you go, you colonists, come and talk to us when you win a championship. And occasionally that happened in Edmonton. It certainly did, but yeah, I think that's a lot. But it's all healthy stuff, right? It's just to be competitive, to have your fandom like or hate, or hate's an awful word, but just to, you know, to be competitive and to have a healthy competitiveness is an absolutely wonderful thing. Social media has made that a lot easier, and there's a lot of hate there, but it shouldn't be. It should be a fantastic competitiveness amongst your teams in your country, and that there's nothing that's unhealthy about that.
Ted, I have two questions. One, this may end up just being one depending on the kind of answer I get, but I'm going to go with this one first. So you've covered a ton of games in your career, but I do want to know, if you had to pick Air Bud or MVP, most valuable primate, I mean, who you got?
Air Bud, because I still get a check every year for $45. Never cash them, but I get residuals from Air Bud, and I've got nothing from MVP. But I had an absolute blast. One of the sad days of my life was that when MVP happened, there was a producer in Vancouver who had cornered the market on all of the animal sports movies, and he was doing Air Bud, he was doing MVP, he did all of those ones. So
what a market to corner!
Yeah, well, it worked for him, and so he called me about MVP, and I went down, and I had a really tough time figuring out how I was going to deal with this, because they asked me to be the announcer for the hockey game, and I think I nailed that part. But I got to have I had my own little room in a trailer, and I had Dave Thomas from SCTV fame.
He
was in the movie, and he was in the trailer next to me, and I got to spend a day hanging out with him, and we shot the movie, and then so my day took about 2 hours, so I'm finished, and most valuable primate comes out, and it's a real kick in the pants. Like it's very cool to have a movie on television when your little kids are watching it and there's dad. Or that was
Double take, right?
that meant more to me than any money that I could have ever been paid for the movie, and I wasn't paid a hell of a lot.
You got a trailer.
But
That's pretty cool.
so then, it's probably about a year later. The same producer calls me, and I was in Philadelphia. I was on a road trip with the Canucks, and he found me in a hotel room and said, we're doing an MVP too. Do you want to be involved in it? I said, sure, I'm in. He said, we're doing it next Friday. And I said, well, I'm on a road trip that I'm not going to be back in Vancouver next Friday. Can you move the date? And he said, no, we'll get somebody else.
Oh,
wow.
So that
was
it. I thought,
cutthroat.
Geez, I thought I did a really good job. And then the Earbud movies, they were good. They were good because, again, I was asked to do a part that I had to thoroughly dig into to be an announcer for a dog throwing baseballs. But I still get a check every year for $45 as my residual, and I've saved every one of them and not cashed them.
That's hilarious.
Oh man.
You know what? That's worth at least, if you put all those checks together, that's like 2 rounds at Predator.
Yeah.
No, not now. One.
Well, I was going to say, depends on how many you've saved up.
Maybe if you're going to walk it, if you're not going to rent a cart, you might be in better shape. I mean, not even just, I mean, so your kids must have just totally tripped over, listening to hear NHL EA Sports games too. I mean, that must have been the similar feeling for them.
You know what? But the thing is, Teddy, when you live the life and your kids grow up in that situation, my son and daughter knew what I did, and it was just kind of, that's what dad does, So
part of the business.
It was not, probably is a bigger deal to them now that they're adults, to look back and think, wow, that's what dad did. But I'm just dad, and try to fit in and try not to screw everything up when I'd come home and after being away for 2 weeks and mess up the entire routine of the house.
Yep.
But I think the EA Sports one was kind of cool because my son was at an age where he was actually playing the game, but I think he liked Need for Speed far better than he liked hockey.
Great game.
Yeah. So
good pull there.
But it's fun things to do in your life. But when you and you guys probably know this, when you live a routine and you do things every day and your family fits into it, nothing that you do is a big deal.
Fair enough.
Unfortunately, you're very right.
It's just who dad is.
Exactly.
That's what he does. And now I'm pissed off that he's not here for my ball game tonight.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So that kind of ties in. This was my second question. Now the serious part of it. So again, you covered the Toronto Blue Jays. You did a lot of hockey as well. Was there a game on, we'll say for baseball and for hockey, that maybe stood out the most for you, maybe starting with baseball?
In answer to both questions, not really, because there's so many really good games. Baseball was kind of interesting because in the day when I was broadcasting the Expo games and then the Toronto Blue Jay games, we didn't get playoffs.
Right.
So didn't get championship games. You handed it over to CBS or whatever network held the rights to those games. So the big championship games weren't there. There's so many fantastic games, like great pitching performances, late season heroics, that sort of thing. Same in hockey. I've seen so many. I always think, though, that there's one game in hockey that stands out to me as one of the finest games that I've ever watched. And it was in the 2012-13 year when there was another lockout. They played the short season, and Chicago and Boston played in the Stanley Cup final. And Game 4 was a 6-5 game in Boston that might have been the most fun game I've ever watched. But then I look at the Sochi Olympics in 2014, and every game that was played there, I look back on that and think the Canadian team at those games is the finest hockey team I've ever seen play the game, bar none. And I run that by guys on that team and coaches, and they don't disagree that like there was never a chance that that team was going to lose a game, even though they'd be playing 1-0 in the third period. They were so much in control. They were such a machine. So yeah, I look back and I see some teams like the Chicago teams that won 3 cups and the LA teams that won 2 cups, and they all have such wonderful qualities that it's hard for me to pick out a particular game or teams that I like better than the other because I love them all.
Well, you did get to call 3, and this will be in our intro that I didn't play. You did get to call 3 uh, division winning games, and one was against the California Angels. That'll be in our intro. So, Ted, keep an eye out for that. So, you still got some pretty epic calls, just not the ones I'm sure you would have liked to have had.
Yeah, it was all good. I just, you know what? I don't like to differentiate one from the other because it's 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 been such a good life, and there's so many good games and so much fun and so many good people that it's hard to differentiate one from the other. Just so many exciting days. Like one of the only things that I missed during COVID was when like the bubble games were absolutely ridiculous. I understand why the NHL did that. I understand why they felt like they had to do it, but it was not an assignment. It was a sentence. It was really like the worst thing I've ever done. And what hit home to me and what I missed was not so much the game, and the games are always good, but I thought about how in recent years the fandom has grown so much around North America that the fans aren't just in the building. The fans are in the streets. The fans are everywhere. Like the league and people have promoted the fact that just because you don't have a ticket to the game doesn't mean you can't be down where the game is being played and be a part of it, whether it's Nashville or Vegas or Boston. And what I felt I truly missed is like 3:30 in the afternoon, walking through the streets of Boston, going over to TD Garden, where the cup could be presented that night, and seeing hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets wearing their sweaters, having beers, having fun, getting excited, getting ready, and that hour long walk to the rink was so fulfilling and so exciting that I thought, wow, this means so much to them. Like this is really exciting for me too. And to see that in Nashville where it had never happened before, and in different cities, in Tampa, was really rewarding. And so that's the part of the day that excites me. And if there's an area that I miss, that would be it. To be in a city where the Stanley Cup can be presented and you can watch the electricity and feel it in the air.
That makes sense. I think that you're right, though. The whole bubble thing definitely it's kind of a buzzkill, and the experience, because sports is an experience, whether you're at the rink or you're outside. Ted, I know during the Olympics and stuff down in Vancouver, just watching a game at a pub, 5 blocks away from the stadium that you had definitely not enough money to be watching the game at, and yet you feel like you're in the arena extended and you're hanging out with people you've never met, and yet everything feels as one. I get it for sure.
Jim, do you have so I mean, I don't know the first thing about calling a game. I don't know what goes into it, but I obviously know that you guys are obviously, professionals at your craft, and a large amount of prep probably has to go into doing something like these. And I feel like every time I watch a game, part of the best part about hearing it is that there's always a story or a bit of a narrative that happens, and somebody's sort of painting the picture of what's going on. do you ever walk into a game and you've just had to, and I always think back to the Vancouver Calgary game where the line brawl happened at the puck drop in minute 1. And
Yeah.
and I think to myself, like, they must have just thrown everything out the window. All that prep now is done. There's players been ejected for the game. Have you ever been in a situation like that where all the prep you put in and it was just like throwing the notebook out the window and now we're just sort of flying by the seat of our pants?
Oh yeah, Ted, it happens constantly. So you prepare. You think you know both of the teams really well. Um, you think you've got a pretty good idea how it's going to get started, and whether it's a line brawl or it's a major penalty in the first 2 minutes, an injury. There's so much that can happen, and it does, and it did for like our whole crew. Uh, we spend hours talking together about all of the things that the two teams that we were involved with were were probably likely to do, and then every note that you made is thrown out the window in the first 10 seconds of the game. And it's a wonderful thing about live sports because that tests you. But if you've done your homework and you know the teams, then you know who's up next and you know what might come next, or at least you can improvise it because, and you're not lost because so and so got thrown out of the game or five guys get thrown out of the game. You still know the teams really well if you've done your preparation properly. But it's the one thing that's beautiful about live sports. It's just you just have no clue. The guy you think is going to win the Masters does a duck hook off the first tee and he's out.
Mhm.
And gets 10 on the first hole. That's the stuff that happens in sports, and that's why it's wonderful because it's one of the most exciting things because it's not scripted. You can think you know everything about both of the teams, and they can still throw a curveball at you, and then you're scrambling, and you better have an idea of what's coming next. But that's kind of fun. I always kind of, in retrospect, it gets the wheels going and it gets you really working. But at the end of the night, those are nights that you think, yeah, that was kind of fun because it was way, way off the board and way off the script.
No kidding.
So from going to, I'll just ask one more quick one here, Ryan. So from going to things you can't plan for to going to things you can plan for, the Wikipedia machine says you're an avid runner and that you have routes in every single NHL city. Is this true? And if there is, do you have a favorite city you like to run in?
Oh boy, that's a tough one, but it's yes. I always thought that. In fact, I've told Gary Bettman this before. I said I run the NHL, and wait for his reaction. And said, no, I don't mean that I run the NHL. I mean I run the NHL. When I was never a guy who liked to run, um, but I was always into sports. And when I started spending a lot of time on the road, it was really difficult to find a way to work out and find a way to. There weren't a lot of gyms or anything like that, and I wasn't really into them. Um, I started running as a way I could stay fit on the road and do it by myself because I didn't have anybody to play a game with. I was just out there. So yeah, over the years, I have developed, and they're really easy to find running routes in every city in the NHL. And probably, if I had to pick a favorite, it might be Mount Royal in Montreal. Nothing like it in the springtime when the playoffs are on, and to run up Mount Royal and run around the top of that. But there are so. What I found is that there are some absolutely gorgeous places all over North America that you can go out for a run. It allows you to see the city, allows you to sort of stay fit, and it's not dangerous. There may have been a time where there's some of the routes that I've been on would have been, but no, it's been fabulous over the years, and I don't think I've missed any cities. I can't. Maybe the new one. I don't have a running route in Seattle, but they came after me.
I think we can give a
Well,
pass on that one. Yeah.
I mean,
And
we're
and I
close
got to
enough
tell
to
you
get a
that
bigger one out.
Vegas was pretty tough because when they came along, um, like 40 degrees at 6 o'clock in the morning is really tough.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's Vegas. I mean, you almost don't want to be running around. I always
Probably not
remember
a
to
good
bring
thing.
the proper sneakers when I'm in Vegas. That's for sure. We're gonna. I've got one more here. I have a couple more, but I think I want to end on this one here, and we'll let you get to your sockeye. This was a question from a good friend of ours, James, and he wanted to know what was the toughest moment in calling a game. Something that you had to maybe choke down emotions and keep it level without kind of bringing it to the forefront.
It's been some injuries. There's, been some tough injuries where people got hurt. And that's really hard because you can't pretend you're a doctor. So you don't really know. And in hindsight, we always find out what happened to the person. And it just would tear me apart to see somebody that is a really good player or whatever, just a player that has spent so much of their life trying to get to where they are, to see them packed off the ice on a stretcher, whether it was a knee or a head injury or whatever it was. So, yeah, if you know the Todd Bertuzzi Steve Moore incident was really tough to get through because it just, I don't know, it was hard to make sense of, and hard to explain some of the old code and things like that. But
Right.
there are a number of those. I don't want to get in too deeply into that, but it's really hard to watch anybody who's put their life into a sport and watch them be injured, and you don't know. You just don't know if it's career ending, if it's an evening ending, if it's a week or 2 weeks. You just don't know, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And now the way the information is passed around now, it might be 3 weeks before you ever hear, and then it's just a lower body injury where the guy's knee is completely decimated. Um,
Right.
so those would be the difficult part of it, because I have such an appreciation of how difficult it is to play sports at the level that people want to watch at the National Hockey League level. Um, that to see somebody's career potentially ripped away from them in the flash of an eye is just really disappointing. Those would be the times that I think I would be most disappointed, and it would just disheartening, because what you want to see is two teams play at the highest possible level and decide it, and then everybody skate away and they're fine.
Okay, one more quick light one. Do you have a quick prediction on where you think Vancouver's going to finish this year? Are they going to make the playoffs, or is it another non-playoff year to start the year or to end
I
the
think they got
season?
a, I think they got a shot,
Yeah.
because they have some things that you need. Like they have a world class goaltender. That's extremely important. They have a stud defenseman, really important. Um, they kind of kept themselves together at center ice, and
So far.
I'm okay there. I don't see a championship team, but I see a team that under Bruce Boudreau can compete for a playoff spot, because they won't lack energy. And you know what they're going to need is they're going to need a couple of new guys that we haven't heard from to do something. Like maybe their new signing, Mikheyev. Maybe he has the season of his life, but maybe there's the new Russian is spectacular. They're gonna need something like that, because they don't have much depth in my estimation. So, but they have some ingredients to make them a team that, if they don't stumble out of the blocks the way they did last year and don't have to be chasing the pack all the time, if they can hang with them, I think they can hang with them right to the end and maybe make a playoff spot.
So Jim Hughson's
Awesome.
calling Canucks Stanley Cup finalists. So
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I don't know what everyone else heard there, but what I heard in
Yeah.
my ears, my selective hearing.
I think you probably made some people happy with that prediction for sure. Hey, we just really appreciate you committing this last hour to us. It was fantastic hearing some of these stories and your thoughts or opinions. but real quick, just before we end this, what do you got going on for the next little bit? You got the best job in the world right now, so that must be a lot of fun. But what are your plans for the next little while? What's Jim Hughson working on, and what would or could people expect from you in the next while?
You'll have to find me to know what I'm up to. You know what? I've spent so much of my life living on the road and living in hotels and flying, and I missed everything. You guys, if you have kids, you understand. When you dedicate your life to the sort of life that I've had, you miss too much. And now you don't ever catch up, but I'm trying to make up for some lost time, be around for everything, and not get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to airports anymore. And when I watch a hockey game, I can watch it from the comfort of my couch. So yeah, not a lot of plans, and just enjoying the fact that I've had it's been a good life for me, and I've had a wonderful time. My family's had a wonderful time, and now we're going to spend a lot of that time together. And I'm going to try and get my handicap down to like a reasonable number so that I'm not embarrassed.
I don't know what a reasonable number is on my side, but Ted, I mean, if Jim will have us, I would love to hit up Oliver, and we could definitely find a time to golf with a legend. I mean, it's golf, and we're more than happy. I mean, we went out on Sunday night, and it wasn't great, but we had a good time. I think when you get out and you hit a decent drive, you can forget about the other 4 shots afterwards. But Jim, thank you so much for coming by. I mean, an absolute pleasure to have you on. This is definitely something that I know I'll cherish. It's the conversation. I think getting to chat with somebody that has definitely been around a couple sports and obviously the movie industry. You're an absolute legend there. It's great to be able to it's great to be able to chat about these things, and I think that's the best part about our show is that it's the stories that really make this. So again, I would just like to say thank you so much for coming on our show, and by all means get back to finishing up that sockeye, and hopefully one day maybe we could have you back at some point.
Ryan and Ted, it's been a fun hour. It's just flown by, and thank you so much for inviting me on.
Not a problem.
Thank
Enjoy
you,
your
Jim.
evening. Thanks, Jim.